Marie Antoinette, the last queen of France before the Revolution, remains a controversial figure in history. Often remembered for her alleged apathy, extravagance, and the infamous phrase, "Let them eat cake."
Let them eat cake.
Her life was marked by both opulence and adversity. As France faced economic struggles and societal unrest, the Queen's fate was sealed in a series of events culminating in her brutal execution. This video delves deep into the life and tragic end of Marie Antoinette, revealing the complexities and challenges she faced. Early life and marriage to Louis XVI. Born on November 2, 1755 in the Hofburg Palace of Vienna, Marie Antoinette was the youngest daughter of Empress Maria Theresa of Austria and Francis I, Holy Roman Emperor. She was raised amidst the opulence and intrigues of the Habsburg court, a world teeming with power politics and cultural grandeur. As a child, she was known for her vivacity and charm, characteristics that endeared her to many, yet also set a stage for future misunderstandings. Growing up as an archduchess in one of Europe's most powerful families, Marie Antoinette received an education fitting her status, though it was more focused on courtly manners, languages, and the arts, rather than rigorous academic pursuits. The fine arts, especially music, became one of her passions. She was skilled in the harp and was known for her appreciation of opera. However, in the grand scheme of royal European politics, the young archduchesses were often considered assets, pawns in the intricate game of alliances and treaties. In 1765, Louis, Dauphin of France, lost his first wife, and the French court began searching for another suitable bride to ensure the continuity of the Bourbon lineage. Marie Antoinette, then only 10 years old, emerged as a primary candidate. The marriage between the Habsburgs and Bourbons would cement an alliance between two former rival powers, France and Austria. Negotiations commenced, and by 1768, the talks had progressed significantly. Marie Antoinette's marriage to Louis Auguste, the future Louis XVI of France, was confirmed when she was 14. As was customary for royal unions, the marriage was more of a political alliance than a love match. The young archduchess had to leave behind her homeland, her language, and her Habsburg identity. She was stripped of her Austrian clothes, dressed in French attire, and even her beloved pet pug was replaced by a French dog. Every aspect of her past was to be forgotten, as she was to become a Dauphine of France. Their wedding, held on May 16, 1770, at the Palace of Versailles, was a grand affair marked by feasting, fireworks, and celebrations. However, as with many arranged royal marriages, the relationship between Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI began awkwardly. Louis XVI, shy and introverted, was almost the opposite of his lively and outgoing bride. The early years of their union were marred by a lack of understanding, further exacerbated by the pressures of producing an heir, a responsibility Marie Antoinette felt deeply. The French court, a hotbed of gossip and intrigue, was initially charmed by the young Dauphine's beauty and vivacity. However, as the years went by without the birth of an heir, whispers began. The inability to consummate the marriage for 7 years added to the woes of the young couple, leading to public ridicule and private frustrations. It's believed that both underwent medical examinations and interventions, seeking solutions to their predicament. Rise to queenhood and the weight of expectations. Marie Antoinette's ascent to the position of Queen of France was not something she had sought out, but was rather a consequence of birthright and political machinations. In May 1774, when Louis XVI passed away, Louis Auguste ascended the throne as Louis XVI, and the young Marie Antoinette, at the age of 19, became the Queen of France. This sudden elevation in status brought with it not just the luxuries of monarchy, but also an array of responsibilities and expectations that would prove overwhelming. The French monarchy, by the late 18th century, was not just a symbol of power, but was also the embodiment of national pride and identity. The king and queen were not only expected to lead the nation in governance, but also in culture, morality, and even fashion. From the outset, Marie Antoinette was scrutinized for her Austrian heritage, and she faced an unspoken pressure to prove her loyalty to France and embody the ideal French queen. The young queen's predilection for fashion, extravagant hairstyles, and lavish parties quickly became the talk of the court and the streets of Paris. While these were common indulgences of the royalty and nobility of the time, Marie Antoinette's excesses were magnified by her position. The famous pouf hairstyle, a towering construction of hair and adornments, was one such fashion trend she popularized. Her patronage of the arts and preference for the neoclassical style also left a lasting impact on French culture. However, beyond the confines of the opulent halls of Versailles, France was in turmoil. The nation was grappling with an economic downturn, further exacerbated by the costs of aiding the American Revolution. The French populace was burdened with taxes, while the nobility enjoyed exemptions. Famine and unemployment added to the people's woes. As the country's problems mounted, the extravagant lifestyle of the royal family, especially Marie Antoinette's spending habits, became a focal point of criticism. The Queen, perhaps oblivious to the larger ramifications of her actions or simply caught in the crosshairs of public sentiment, was soon dubbed Madame Deficit. Her perceived insensitivity to the plight of the common man, coupled with rumors about her personal life, further tarnished her image. It's worth noting that many of these rumors were baseless, a product of the aggressive pamphleteering of the time, aimed at discrediting the monarchy. In the midst of this, Marie Antoinette did show an understanding of her role as queen. She became more involved in politics, supporting ministers and policies she believed were in the best interest of the monarchy and France. However, her interventions were often met with resistance from the established nobility and ministers, further isolating her. Her perceived influence over the king was also problematic. While she often acted out of genuine concern for the state of the kingdom, her critics saw it as meddling, furthering the narrative of her being a negative influence on Louis XVI. In many ways, the weight of expectations on Marie Antoinette was a product of the times. The age was one of transition, with the Enlightenment ideals challenging the traditional monarchic values. The populace sought more say in governance, and the monarchy, long unchallenged in its authority, was ill-prepared to navigate these changing waters. The outbreak of the French Revolution and its impact. The late 18th century was a time of tumultuous change for France. Economic hardships, rising inequalities, and an outdated feudal system had ignited a powder keg of dissatisfaction among the populace. The Enlightenment ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity further fueled these sentiments. By 1789, France stood on the brink of revolution, and the monarchy, with Marie Antoinette as its most visible face, was directly in the line of fire. The Estates General was convened in May 1789 to address the nation's dire financial situation. It was the first time this representative assembly had been called in over a century. The Third Estate, representing the commoners and a significant portion of the nation's population, soon realized their marginalization in this system. This realization led to their breakaway to form the National Assembly, signaling the beginning of the French Revolution. The storming of the Bastille in July of the same year, a symbol of royal tyranny, marked a significant escalation in revolutionary activities. For Marie Antoinette, these events were deeply unsettling. As the revolution gained momentum, the royal family's movements and privileges were increasingly restricted. The October days of 1789 saw the royal family being forcibly moved from the Palace of Versailles to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, a move that symbolized the monarchy's diminishing power and the revolution's tightening grip. Marie Antoinette's Austrian heritage and her perceived extravagance made her a particularly reviled figure among the revolutionaries. Pamphleteers and newspapers painted her as a traitor, often exaggerating or fabricating stories about her excesses and alleged affairs. Her correspondence with her family in Austria, particularly her brother, Emperor Leopold II, further fueled suspicions of her loyalty to France. Many believed that she was conspiring with foreign powers to suppress the revolution and restore the monarchy's absolute authority. Amid this backdrop, Marie Antoinette showed resilience and adaptability. Gone were the days of lavish parties and extravagant fashion choices. Instead, she was now a more somber and politically engaged figure, involved in covert plans to secure the safety of her family. There were attempts to negotiate with various factions, and even plans to escape the revolutionary fervor of Paris. However, the escalating radicalism of the revolution made any form of reconciliation increasingly unlikely. The monarchy's attempts to flee, notably the failed escape to Varennes in 1791, only cemented their image as traitors in the eyes of many revolutionaries. This event was particularly damning for Marie Antoinette, who was seen as the primary instigator of the escape plan. The year 1792 marked a significant turning point. The monarchy was officially abolished and the French Republic was proclaimed. The royal family, once the pinnacle of French society, were now prisoners. Louis XVI's trial and subsequent execution in January 1793 was a clear indication of the revolution's radical direction. For Marie Antoinette, the death of her husband was both a personal tragedy and a foreboding sign of her impending fate, public perception, and the Madame Deficit persona. Marie Antoinette's entrance into the French court was met with a blend of curiosity, expectation, and intrigue. As a foreign-born queen, her every move was under intense scrutiny from the outset. The vibrant French media, particularly the print culture, played an instrumental role in shaping her public image, a portrayal that veered between adulation and severe criticism. In her early years as queen, Marie Antoinette's penchant for lavish fashion, grand balls, and extravagant spending earned her both admiration and ire. Her youthful exuberance and the seemingly frivolous pursuits of the court were magnified in the public eye, at times overshadowing her role as queen. For many, she embodied the essence of French sophistication and style. However, as France's financial condition worsened, these very attributes turned against her. By the 1780s, the country's economic woes were palpable. Bad harvests, rising food prices, and France's involvement in the costly American Revolutionary War drained the royal coffers. Yet, the narrative in popular discourse was increasingly one of a spendthrift queen squandering the nation's wealth. This was a stark contrast to the realities of national economics, where Marie Antoinette's personal expenditures, though extravagant, were a mere drop in the ocean compared to France's broader financial challenges. Nevertheless, the symbol of a luxurious queen in a time of national hardship was a potent one. The nickname Madame Deficit was a manifestation of this sentiment. It encapsulated the public's growing frustration with the perceived decadence of the monarchy. While Louis XVI was often seen as weak and indecisive, Marie Antoinette was painted as the manipulative force behind the throne, leading France into ruin with her unchecked extravagance. The role of pamphleteers and libelists during this period cannot be overstated. They churned out a constant stream of publications, many of which were salacious and defamatory, targeting Marie Antoinette's personal life and character. Tales of her alleged love affairs, particularly with Swedish Count Axel von Fersen, were fodder for gossip mills. The infamous affair of the diamond necklace, in which she was unjustly implicated, only added to her negative image. Even though she was innocent, the scandal reinforced the narrative of a morally corrupt and financially reckless queen. These character assassinations were not mere tabloid fodder. They had significant political implications. In the heated climate leading up to the revolution, the vilification of Marie Antoinette served a purpose. By discrediting the monarchy and eroding its moral authority, revolutionary factions could garner greater public support for their cause. The Queen, with her foreign origins and ostentatious lifestyle, was the perfect scapegoat. It is essential to contextualize this within the broader European trend of using powerful women as political targets. Throughout history, influential women in positions of authority, from Queen Elizabeth I of England to Empress Catherine the Great of Russia, faced similar campaigns to undermine their reputations. Marie Antoinette, in many ways, was a victim of this age-old tactic. The failed escape to Varennes. By 1791, the French Revolution had significantly transformed the political landscape of the nation. The monarchy's authority was heavily curtailed, with Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette essentially held captive within their own capital. Paris, with its revolutionary fervor, was a cauldron of anti-monarchist sentiments, and the royal family's every move was monitored. In these precarious circumstances, the idea of escape began to take shape. The plan was audacious in its intent: to flee Paris under the cover of darkness, travel to the northeastern town of Montmédy near the fortified royalist stronghold, and from there regroup with loyalist forces and perhaps even foreign aid. Success would mean a chance to reclaim the monarchy's authority, while failure could spell doom. The escape, executed on the night of June 20th, 1791, began with promise. The royal family, disguised as commoners, managed to slip out of the Tuileries Palace. Accompanying them were a few loyal aides and bodyguards. Their destination was Varennes, a small town near the border with the Austrian Netherlands. From there, the plan was to proceed to Montmédy. However, the journey, which should have taken about 24 hours, was plagued by delays. Miscalculations, miscommunications, and a lack of urgency resulted in lost time. The royal party's large carriage moved slowly, and the designated relays were often ill-prepared for their arrival. The king's recognizable face, despite his disguise, also did them no favors. As the hours passed, the news of the royal family's disappearance began to spread. By the time they reached the town of Saint-Menehould, their cover was almost blown, with Postmaster Jean-Baptiste Drouet recognizing the king from his portrait on currency. Drouet then rode ahead to Varennes to alert the authorities. When the royal entourage finally arrived in Varennes, they were hours behind schedule. Their attempt to cross the bridge over the river Ère was thwarted by local officials, armed citizens, and the now arrived Drouet. After some initial confusion and failed persuasions, the royal family's true identities were confirmed, sealing their fate. The gravity of their situation became clear as the royal family was escorted back to Paris. They were met not with cheers, but with silence or outright hostility. The very act of fleeing had confirmed, in the eyes of many revolutionaries, the treacherous intentions of the monarchy. Their escape attempt was seen as a betrayal of the nation and the revolution. The repercussions of the failed escape to Varennes were immense. Politically, the incident was a watershed moment. It deepened the divide between the royalists and the revolutionaries. Moderate factions who had hoped for a constitutional monarchy found their position untenable. Radicals seized upon the event to further diminish the monarchy's standing, pushing for a republic. The monarchy's downfall and imprisonment. Following the botched escape to Varennes, the position of the monarchy in France became increasingly tenuous. The revolution's tide was turning, and the once unquestionable authority of the crown was now not only challenged, but actively derided. The events of 1791 had made it abundantly clear: the Bourbon monarchy was on the precipice of a steep decline. Louis XVI's return to Paris was a spectacle of humiliation. Gone were the trappings of royal splendor. Instead, the king and his family were met with conspicuous silence from a populace that once cheered for them. This stark change in public sentiment indicated a profound shift in the nation's political conscience. The king's attempt to flee had shattered any residual trust. To many, it was proof of his collusion with foreign powers against the French Revolution. In the ensuing months, pressures mounted on the king to affirm his loyalty to the revolutionary cause. In a bid to salvage his position, Louis XVI agreed to a constitution in September 1791, effectively reducing his role to that of a constitutional monarch. However, this concession did little to placate the radical factions who believed that the very institution of the monarchy was antithetical to the principles of the revolution. Marie Antoinette, ever the lightning rod for public criticism, faced even greater scrutiny. Her correspondence with foreign powers, especially her brother, the Holy Roman Emperor Leopold II, stoked suspicions of a broader European conspiracy to quash the revolution. This notion of the Queen as a traitor, actively plotting against her adopted nation, further inflamed public sentiment. As tensions escalated, events in 1792 precipitated the monarchy's final downfall. The outbreak of war with Austria in April exacerbated domestic unrest. The Parisian mob, increasingly radicalized, viewed the royal family not only as inept rulers, but as active threats to the revolution. This sentiment culminated in the storming of the Tuileries Palace on August 10, 1792, a violent confrontation that signaled the effective end of the Bourbon monarchy. Just days later, the National Assembly declared the monarchy abolished, giving rise to the First French Republic. The erstwhile royal family was subsequently imprisoned in the Temple, a fortified medieval building in Paris. Their imprisonment was starkly different from their earlier confinement in the Tuileries. The conditions were austere, with the family subjected to constant surveillance. Every aspect of their daily lives, from correspondence to visitors, was heavily restricted. Within the cold walls of the temple, the family faced profound isolation. The king, once the ruler of a vast empire, was now a prisoner awaiting his fate. For Marie Antoinette, the transition from a queen's opulence to a prisoner's austerity was a harrowing experience. Her primary concern, however, was the well-being of her children, especially her son, the young Dauphin Louis Charles, who would face his own set of tragedies in the months to come. The king's execution sent shockwaves throughout Europe and deepened the chasm between revolutionary factions within France. For the royal family left in the Temple, it was a clear indication of the grim path the revolution had taken. Trial and conviction. In the aftermath of Louis XVI's execution, the political atmosphere in Paris was charged with a mix of triumph and trepidation. The once unthinkable act of regicide had been committed, signifying the revolution's irrevocable break from the old order. However, for Marie Antoinette, the demise of her husband marked the beginning of her own grim legal ordeal. The Revolutionary Tribunal, established in March 1793, was tasked with prosecuting those deemed enemies of the revolution. Given the heightened political climate, its proceedings often leaned towards show trials rather than fair judicial practices. Marie Antoinette, with her tarnished reputation and perceived transgressions, was a prime target for this tribunal. In October 1793, the former queen was brought before the tribunal, charged with a litany of crimes ranging from orchestrating state treason to moral corruption. The indictment painted her as a woman of unchecked extravagance, a manipulator of her husband, and a traitor colluding with foreign powers. More salaciously, she was also accused of teaching her son, the Dauphin, perverse values and immoral behaviors. The trial was less about establishing the truth and more about reinforcing a narrative. Many of the charges were based on hearsay, distorted facts, or outright fabrications. The defense allotted to Marie Antoinette was limited, with her counsel given minimal time to prepare and rebut the barrage of accusations. Throughout the proceedings, Marie Antoinette displayed a mix of dignity and defiance. Her responses were measured, often refuting the charges with a calm assertiveness. When confronted with the scandalous accusation involving her son, her response was a mix of maternal anguish and righteous indignation. She turned to the women of the jury, imploring them to consider the plausibility of such a claim. This moment, though poignant, did little to sway the tribunal's predetermined verdict. After 2 days of proceedings, the outcome was clear. Marie Antoinette was found guilty on all counts. Her fate was sealed with the tribunal sentencing her to death. The woman who had once been the toast of Europe, celebrated for her grace and beauty, was now condemned as an enemy of the French Republic. In the shadow of this verdict, reflections on the trial reveal the deeper motivations at play. Marie Antoinette, for the revolutionaries, represented the excesses and failures of the Ancien Regime. Her conviction was as much about the symbolic repudiation of the old order as it was about her alleged crimes. In the theater of revolutionary justice, she was the perfect antagonist, and her conviction was a potent propaganda tool. Moreover, the trial showcased the extremities of the revolution's trajectory. The Enlightenment principles of justice, liberty, and fraternity seemed overshadowed by a zealous quest for retribution. The once noble aspirations of the revolution appeared increasingly tainted by the blood of its perceived enemies. Final moments and the guillotine. The dawn of October 16, 1793, brought with it a chilling air of finality. The streets of Paris, so often filled with revolutionary fervor and chants, bore witness to a somber procession. At its center was Marie Antoinette, once the Queen of France, now a condemned prisoner facing the grim certainty of the guillotine. The journey from the Conciergerie, where she had been imprisoned, to the Place de la Révolution was deliberately circuitous, a prolonged route meant to expose her to the full gaze of the Parisian populace. Gone were the regal gowns and towering hairstyles. In their place was a simple white dress, her hair shorn, her hands bound behind her back. Despite her diminished state, Marie Antoinette carried herself with a dignity that belied her circumstances. Her gaze, though weary from imprisonment and grief, remained resolute. The crowd that lined the streets was vast, a mix of curious onlookers, fervent revolutionaries, and those grappling with the gravity of the moment. Here was a former queen, a symbol of the old order, about to meet a fate that just a few years prior would have been unthinkable. The very act of executing a queen was not just a personal condemnation, but a definitive break from the past. Upon reaching the scaffold, Marie Antoinette displayed a final act of defiance. As she ascended the steps, she accidentally stepped on the foot of the executioner, to which she swiftly responded with a whispered, "Pardon me, sir. I meant not to do it."
Excusez-moi, monsieur.
Courage, madame.
This brief interaction, whether interpreted as an instinctual politeness or a subtle resistance, showcased her indomitable spirit. The guillotine, with its gleaming blade and stark design, was a symbol of revolutionary justice. Its very presence was a reminder of the revolution's power and the fate of those deemed its enemies. As Marie Antoinette was positioned, the crowd fell into a hushed silence, the weight of the moment palpable. With a swift motion, the blade descended, and the last Queen of France was no more. The crowd's reaction was mixed, with some erupting in cheers, viewing the act as a victory for the Republic, while others looked on in stunned silence, grappling with the reality of regicide. Marie Antoinette's execution was more than the death of an individual. It symbolized the revolution's radical extremes. The guillotine, which had claimed countless lives during the Reign of Terror, stood as a testament to the revolution's dual capacity for lofty ideals and brutal pragmatism. The act of executing a former queen underscored the message that no one, regardless of their birthright or status, was above the principles of the revolution.